Good evening and welcome to KQED Newsroom. I'm Thuy Vu. Tonight's show will focus on two issues in San Francisco that are the subject of fierce debates here and across the nation. Later, Scott Shafer will have more on whether local law enforcement agencies should cooperate with federal immigration officials. But first, we're going to take a look at one of the most contentious issues on the city's November ballot. Proposition F takes aim at Airbnb and other short-term rental services. It would cap short-term rentals at 75 nights per year for each home or apartment. It would also require hosts to give the city quarterly reports on how many nights their properties had been rented. And it would allow people to sue neighbors who violate the new rules, a point highlighted in anti-Prop F ads.
Prop F will ban short-term rental of in-law units, encourage neighbors to sue each other, and violate people's privacy.
Opponents of Prop F, which include Airbnb, have raised more than $8 million. By contrast, landlords, hotel unions, and housing activists backing Prop F have raised more than $250,000. Joining us now to debate the measure are Patrick Hannan, campaign manager for No on F, and Dale Carlson, co-founder of ShareBetter SF, which backs the proposition. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Dale, why is Proposition F necessary? San Francisco enacted laws for short-term rentals just in February.
They did, but every independent analyst that's looked at those laws has said they're unworkable and unenforceable. You've got to have the ability to sanction hosting platforms like Airbnb and the 60 other companies that are doing this in the city when they list illegal units, when they list units that are not registered with the city. Airbnb has 6,000 listings. 667 people have bothered to register in San Francisco. There are 6,000 more listings on those 60 other websites. So Proposition F tries to get a handle on that, tries to limit the ability of hosting platforms to list illegal units.
Well, this summer, the city opened its Office of Short-Term Rental Administration and Enforcement. How much time do you think that office should be given to make the laws, the current laws, work?
I think if every independent analyst says the laws are unworkable and unenforceable, no amount of time is going to make them magically transform into something else.
Mr. Hannan, what is your biggest opposition to Prop F?
Look, Proposition F takes an extreme approach toward a very sensible regulations that currently exist. The fact of the matter is the Office of Short-Term Rental is pursuing bad actors. The city is going after dozens of people who have violated the rules and is levying hundreds of thousands of dollars of fines. Proposition F goes way too far. It gives neighbors the opportunity to sue each other over perceived violations. It mandates that some people report where they're sleeping at night to the city, and the city will track and hold on to that information. And for absolutely no reason, it bans the short-term rental of any in-law unit in San Francisco. This measure was patched together and is the wrong direction for San Francisco and really does not give the existing laws the chance to work.
Well, let's break this down because you brought up 3 points here, of 3 points of opposition. So let's begin with the lawsuit issue, right? Dale, your organization says allowing lawsuits against hosts who violate the law holds people accountable. You say that this allows people to sue their neighbors to make money. What is wrong with allowing people to sue if they feel like the laws have not been obeyed?
Well, first of all, what Prop F does is it creates what's called a private right of action. And that private right of action allows for special damages. So a person actually now has a profit motive to sue their neighbor. Rather than going over and addressing a conflict directly or a small disagreement, now the easiest thing to do is to pick up the phone, file an anonymous complaint with the city, and 60 days later, regardless of what the city's done, you can file your lawsuit. I think that's the wrong direction to go, and I think that's the wrong way for San Francisco neighbors to manage potential conflicts.
Dale, your response?
You know, Airbnb is spending $8 million, $8.5 million so far, and we still have 4 weeks to go to the election, trying to scare people about lawsuits and loss of privacy and that sort of thing. The fact is there are hundreds and hundreds of complaints that have been filed with the city. And so far, the city's only brought violations against 9 landlords.
Have you filed any complaints against the city?
Yes, several.
How many?
For example, there's a woman who called me. Her family owns a 3-unit building on Hyde Street near Fisherman's Wharf. Her ground floor tenant has been renting on Airbnb. He claims he's the #1 host in San Francisco, rents his $3,000 a month rent-controlled apartment for up to $11,000 a month, and uses the proceeds to spend 3 months in Bali, 3 months in Thailand. She called Airbnb and said, he does not have my permission to do this. Take down the listing, cancel any reservations.
And then what happened?
And Airbnb said no. The folks who manage all the housing in the Presidio had the same issue with Airbnb, called Airbnb, stop listing these units, cancel the reservations. Airbnb said no. I don't see how a responsible corporation behaves like that. And I don't think they're going to change their behavior until the city has the ability to fine them for listing unregistered units.
This question is to both of you. Only a small percentage of hosts have registered with the city in accordance with the law, which you've already alluded to. What more needs to be done to encourage compliance, Patrick?
Well, number one, I think it's important to note that the city continues to refine and streamline the registration process. Even earlier this week, look, this law has been in place since February, and they're continuing to try to figure out how to make it work better. What Prop F would do is Prop F would lock in bad regulation forever. You wouldn't be able to change it unless we went back to the ballot. But I think you do ask Dale an important question, which is how many complaints has Dale filed against these short-term rental? What my understanding is you filed up to 50 of them. And I have to wonder that if somebody is filing that many complaints, that perhaps the process isn't wrong. Perhaps I've never filed 50 complaints for anything. Have you? And I have to wonder if at this point, whether it's really the process that's the issue or perhaps the people that are doing the complaining. We live in a big city. We live next to our neighbors, live on top of our neighbors, and we have to learn to get along with them. And the way to learn to get along is not to give somebody more opportunities to complain and more opportunities to file suit. The city has a process. We should let that process work.
Well, I want to move it beyond Dale. We're not talking about Dale, the individual complaint filer, but really talk about sort of the broader playing field here. And do you think Prop F would get more people to register?
I think it would take a lot of the bad actors out of the equation. I mean, the law says you can only rent your principal residence, your primary residence. And if it isn't your primary residence, you're not allowed to list it on a short-term basis. Most of the listings that are on Airbnb, just virtually all of the listings that are on VRBO and HomeAway and the other 60 websites are not principal residences. They're investment properties, they're second homes, they're pied-à-terres. We have lost somewhere between 10 and 12,000 housing units to Airbnb and other tourist rental agencies. And at a time when the city is suffering through its worst housing crisis since 1906, I don't think it's appropriate to turn housing into tourist hotels.
Patrick, is Airbnb removing scarce housing from an already tight market?
Look, we talk about scare tactics. That's a scare tactic. Talking to people and convincing them that there are these thousands of units that are being taken off the market. That's just not true. But these scare tactics are being taken seriously by other people. Yesterday, there was a protest outside of a man's house who has 3 rent-controlled tenants that he just moved in there. This person was the good actor. He did the right thing. And instead, this kind of hyperbole gets people worked up, and they go out and without any evidence or any documentation, they go out and they are making these accusations against people that are completely innocent. And I with all due respect, I don't think that's appropriate.
City planning folks have acknowledged that the current laws are unenforceable. That it's a tough job for them. So do you think Airbnb should be required to release its host data to the city so that they can do a cross-check and see who's registered, who's not, who's got too many days listed, and who doesn't? So
first of all, the city official that said that in February. Since then, there have been changes to the system to make it more efficient and better, including the Office of Short-Term Rental Administration being opened. And so there has been changes since that time. In terms of whether these people should be, there is a process in place for taking care of the bad actors, and I believe that process should be allowed to continue. We all support making sure people aren't taking advantage of the system, but once there's a process in place, we should allow that process to be developed and to allow it to continue and work. And this is not being given that chance.
Wait a minute. If somebody calls Airbnb and says, this kid is renting his unit in my building without my permission, take down the listing and cancel the reservations, and Airbnb says no, how much worse of an actor do you have to be in order to get booted off the Airbnb platform?
Dale, they should be calling the city and filing the complaint with the city as the process that you know very well.
We did file the complaint with the city. The city couldn't find the listing because the kid puts it up for a couple of days, books 3 months worth of bookings, and takes it down.
How is it that you think that's going to change? Just because one platform is listed on one platform, because the bad actors are listing on multiple platforms.
He can't register without his landlord's permission if Prop F is in place. And if he's not registered, Airbnb can't list the unit. And if Airbnb does, Airbnb gets fined.
He can't register right now with the city. The way it is, he needs his landlord's permission right now.
No, 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 no. You can register, you can go to the planning department or now the omnipotent Office of Short-Term Rentals, and you can register, and your landlord is notified after the fact.
Look, I think the difference of opinion here is that I believe that the city has an enforcement mechanism in place, and that's the right way for anybody to raise concerns with what's going on in the city. Dale believes that neighbors should be empowered to go out and take this on their own. I'd rather see the city process work very much.
So
we would too, and we're giving the city the incentive and the tools the city says it needs to enforce the law. I don't want neighbors suing neighbors. I want the city to enforce the law. But if you're going to file a complaint against a house across the street that's been turned into a weekend party palace, and the city does nothing to go after that complaint, you ought to have the right to go to court and defend your own right to privacy, your own right to the quiet enjoyment of your home.
Dale, the city says they have the tools. Why is it that you think that you know better than the person in charge of going after these people?
The planning department, the Board of Supervisors budget and legislative analyst, a group of graduate students from Cal.
2 days ago, the head of the Office of Short-Term Administration came out and said, I have the tools and the funding I need to go after bad actors. Why do you think you know better than him?
Do you really believe that 3 people in the Office of Short-Term Rentals are capable of handling 10 or 12,000 unregistered units?
The person in charge of it does. And yet you seem to think that you know better. Why is that?
I'm listening to the experts that looked at the law. I'm listening to the planning department. I'm listening to the budget and legislative analyst. I'm listening to the CEO of HomeAway, Airbnb's biggest competitor, who has been quoted repeatedly saying the San Francisco law is a joke. It's a roadmap to evasion. You lie, you obfuscate, there's no chance the city is ever going to catch you.
You're listening to everyone except for the person in charge of actually doing the work.
Who's a flunky for the mayor, who's tied up with Airbnb.
And now you're insulting people. This is not, is this how we have a thoughtful dialogue about policy?
Let's move this on. You brought up the mayor. Let's move along those lines. Mayor Ed Lee is opposed to Prop F, but Senator Feinstein, a very well-respected politician in the state, has come out supporting Prop F, saying, look, Airbnb and other services like it are really incentivizing people to convert their units into de facto hotels.
Look, Mayor Ed Lee's support is opposing Prop F. Lieutenant Governor Gavin Newsom's opposing Prop F. The San Francisco Democratic Party, which stands up for middle-class families, they're opposing Prop F. The fact of the matter is that a large number of people recognize that this is an important tool that helps middle-class families make ends meet. The hosts that are hosting people they're not people with multiple properties by and large. They're regular folks that are trying to make ends meet. The average host brings in $13,000 a year. $13,000 a year through their Airbnb rentals.
And they can still do that.
And up to 40% of that goes towards their housing costs. These are not rich people that are doing this by and large.
But there's nothing in Prop F that would prevent them from continuing to rent out their properties through Airbnb, for example, and other services like it. It just puts some limits on how often they can rent it out.
But it also requires that they file quarterly reports documenting where they sleep at night. Under Prop F, San Francisco will be the only government in the world documenting where you sleep at night. Not Syria, not North Korea, not the Taliban, but San Francisco. Dale, you wrote a law that's going to require people to say whether they slept at home or not.
That's right.
That's really invasive.
That's not invasive at all. The law says it has to be your primary residence. And the law defines that as a place where you sleep 275 nights a year. So if you want to do this 75 nights a year, fine. Tell us how many nights you rented and how many nights you were present. I mean, the city's going to have to require that same sort of information to collect the hotel tax.
But Dale, the reality here also is that the No on F campaign has $8 million to spend. Are you going to be able to overcome that? How are you going to challenge that?
You know, we have the most extraordinary list of endorsements I've ever seen in 30 years of San Francisco politics. We have Feinstein, we have Art Agnos, and we have Quentin Kopp. We have the Sierra Club and the San Francisco Building and Construction Trades Union. We have the Apartment Association and the Tenants Union, and those people are normally at one another's throats.
Okay, well, we are going to have to leave it there. Obviously, a very closely watched issue across the nation, not just here in San Francisco, and we will see how voters decide November 3rd. Thank you both. Dale Carlson with ShareBetter SF and also Patrick Hannan with the No on F campaign.
Thank you.
Thank you, Thuy.
Thanks, Thuy. I'm Scott Shafer. Now we look at the debate over San Francisco's sanctuary city policy. It places strict limits on when law enforcement officials can assist federal authorities with immigration investigations. The ordinance has come under intense national scrutiny after the fatal shooting of Kate Steinle on Pier 14 in July. The man charged in Steinle's killing, Juan Francisco Lopez Sanchez, is an undocumented immigrant who had been deported from the United States multiple times. San Francisco Sheriff Ross Mercury said his department was following the city's sanctuary policy when it released Sanchez from jail without notifying federal immigration officials. Well, now San Francisco's Board of Supervisors is debating whether to change city policies. In July, Supervisor Mark Farrell was on our show discussing his proposal to amend that ordinance.
Our sanctuary city ordinance has been a pillar of our public safety policy in San Francisco for decades. It was originally passed in 1989 and has served our city well. But what is baked in there, and it was baked in federal law and mandated in federal law, that our law enforcement officials have the discretion to communicate with federal and state law enforcement officers when they deem necessary. In this case, what our sheriff's department did was go above and beyond that and issue a gag order to their own department saying you may not communicate under any circumstance with these authorities. And that's what we're seeking to get to be done.
What about the internal politics of this? I mean, Sheriff Mercury had asked for some clarification from the Board of Supervisors. That did not happen. He is going to be running for re-election. The campaign to unseat him has already begun. How do we prevent city politics from affecting the way that we make these law enforcement policies to hopefully prevent future Kate Steinles from meeting the same fate?
It's a great question, and we need to simply look at the facts and the laws that are written and have an honest discussion about where we need to go from here. And the law, as written, gives our sheriff's department and all of law enforcement the discretion when necessary to communicate with federal and state law enforcement personnel given immigration matters. What the sheriff's department did, though, was go above and beyond that and take that discretion away from their own department. And from my perspective, it not only violates local law, it violates federal law and was against the intent of what the sanctuary city policy put in place for.
And for people who really don't understand this whole idea, does San Francisco really need to be a sanctuary city? I mean, what do we get out of calling ourselves that?
Well, I think it goes a little bit about the ethos of our city. Our country in San Francisco was founded on immigrants. My mother is an immigrant from a different country. My grandparents on my father's side were immigrants to the United States. We need to make sure in the city of San Francisco, I do believe across our country, and I should note over 320 cities across the United States are sanctuary cities. We are not alone. We are not just a pioneer in the city of San Francisco. We join most other major U.S. cities in doing this. But it's important that we make sure that we don't unfairly target those that are on our streets solely based upon their immigration status. That's not what we're about as a country. It's not what we're about as a city, and we should not begin doing that.
Recently, Supervisor David Campos introduced legislation to reaffirm the city's sanctuary policy. He joins me here in the studio. Supervisor Campos, welcome.
Thank you.
You introduced some legislation this week at the Board of Supervisors, one piece of which basically reaffirms San Francisco's sanctuary city ordinance. Explain what it would do exactly.
Well, actually, it's a three-piece package that addresses, what happened with the tragedy of the Steinle family. It specifically addresses the issue of minimizing the contacts between law enforcement in San Francisco and ICE by actually looking at old warrants so that we're not executing on old warrants. It also looks at the issue of what happened with this firearm that was a weapon that was given to a law enforcement agency but was not properly locked. So we have an ordinance that addresses that.
Out of his car.
Exactly. So we have a law that addresses that issue. And then the third piece, which is a reaffirmation of our status as a sanctuary city, and specifically addressing the point that consistent with being a sanctuary city, which the mayor has said we should continue to be, the board has said we continue to be, that we are not going to participate in the priority enforcement program, which is the new version of secure communities that the federal government is trying to sell.
Now, there are some people, including your colleague Mark Farrell, who think that this should be loosened a little bit. He wants to, what he calls, undo the gag order that the sheriff is under that prevents the sheriff from having communication with ICE, with the Federal Immigration Service. Why not do that? Why not add that to what you're proposing?
Where I disagree with my good friend Mark Farrell and Ross Mercury is that they're trying to make it about Ross Mercury. I don't want to focus on Ross Mercury. I want to focus on the policy, and the policy should be what kind of direction do we give our law enforcement The problem with taking away a memo and then not giving any direction is that you leave it up to each individual deputy to decide for themselves what is right.
But what about when we're talking about undocumented immigrants who are in jail, in county jail, who have a record of violence and perhaps are wanted on outstanding warrants? Why not have a communication with the federal government, as Los Angeles did just last week?
Well, actually, that's already allowed for in our sanctuary ordinance, and in the due process law allows for certain action when there is any violent activity. What we're talking about is whether or not we're going to participate in PEP. And let's be very clear about PEP. PEP is the so-called secure communities with a different name.
And PEP is Priority Enforcement
Program. It's, you know, secure communities was a pig. They're trying to put lipstick on a pig, but this pig remains a pig. What we're saying is our law already addresses the issue of violent crime. We don't need to address something that we've already touched on.
But
what we're saying is, going forward, are we going to remain a sanctuary city? And if we really are going to remain a sanctuary city, then let's not participate in a program that entangles our law enforcement with immigration.
But why not do what Los Angeles did? They also are a sanctuary city. And they last week announced that they were going to loosen the limits. They were going to allow immigration agents into the jails with strict limits so that they could only find and perhaps deal with deportable, undocumented immigrants who have serious criminal a past that's violent crime.
The law allows that for happen already. There is no need for us to become an arm of immigration for that to happen. What's happening in LA is actually very disturbing, because what LA is doing is what we have refused to do in San Francisco, which is to turn our police officers, our deputy sheriffs into agents of immigration. Why is that dangerous? You know, the way that I explain it is this: all of us live near someone who's undocumented. And that person who's undocumented is not going to come forward and report crime that they're the witness to or victim to unless they have trust in law enforcement. But they're not going to have trust if they see law enforcement as an extension of immigration.
But there was a poll out last week from UC Berkeley, the Institute for Intergovernmental Studies, showed that almost 2/3 of Latino voters supported communication between immigration officials and people who have a criminal past, even if they're undocumented.
That's already allowed for in our law. So why are we talking about something that we have already addressed? The problem that I have with the rhetoric that's coming out is that even though our law already says that there are actions to be taken whenever there is any kind of violent criminal activity, there are people who are choosing to use the rhetoric of violence to justify turning local police into immigration, and that's wrong. It's wrong when Donald Trump does it, and it's wrong when it happens here at the local level.
But federal officials had asked Sheriff Mercarimi to hold on to, or at least let them know before the gentleman who was accused of killing Kate Steinle was let out of prison, and the sheriff said he wouldn't do that, couldn't do that without an explicit court order.
What my law does, and the resolution that I introduced, and we work with the district attorney to address this issue, is going forward. We're codifying a process that before we execute on a warrant, that the sheriff is going to talk to the GA to make sure that this is a warrant that actually would be prosecuted. In this case, you're talking about a 20-year-old warrant for marijuana. The difference, though, is that in this case, it was a bench warrant. So we're trying to minimize the opportunity, the chances that we're going to make that mistake. The problem I have here, Scott, is that people are trying to scapegoat an entire community of immigrants, and make it look like what happened, one tragic incident, which is very tragic, somehow signifies how the rest of us who are immigrants are, and that's not the reality.
Other than the stolen gun, which your proposal would address, that the gun stolen from the federal official that was used in the murder of Kate Steinle, is there anything that San Francisco could have done or should have done that might have saved her life, that might have prevented that murder?
Well, I think what we're trying to do is to address the issue of outstanding warrants, make sure that when we seek someone for transfer from an ICE detention program center to San Francisco, that it's on an item that will be prosecuted.
In other words, he wouldn't have been sent here on a 20-year-old marijuana charge, which the DA never would have prosecuted.
Exactly. But beyond that, let me say this, that people have tried to turn this tragedy into a case about only and only immigration, and we're addressing the immigration piece responsively, but what they're also forgetting is that there is a gun control issue as well. And you had a federal agent that left their gun in their car. The gun was stolen, and yet the federal government is saying nothing about that. We're actually doing something.
We're a little short on time, but I want to ask you, I know that you came from Guatemala with your family. You came over once, you got caught, you were sent back, you came again without documents. This is personal for you, isn't it? And how does that inform the way you look at this?
Well, I think it's personal in the sense that I've lived that experience, but it's also personal because I see how families are being torn apart by this misguided policy of scapegoating immigrants. The reality is, but for the immigration piece, most of us who came to this country, we came to be good, productive members of this society. We follow the law and we try to do right every day of the year. What's happening is that Donald Trump and other people are using this incident to scapegoat an entire community.
Although it's not just Donald Trump, even the Homeland Security Chief Jay Johnson said that these policies are unproductive, counterproductive to public safety.
Well, coming from the Obama administration, which has failed on immigration reform, I'm not surprised. They actually had more, deportations than George Bush. I don't think Obama and his administration are in a position to point fingers at the local government. I think they have failed. We're actually trying to keep our public safe.
And just really quickly, the next step is that this goes to the full board October 20th?
That's correct.
Okay. Thanks very much, Supervisor David Campos. Thanks for coming in.
Thank you.
For Thuy Vu, I'm Scott Shafer. Thanks for joining us. For all of KQED's news coverage, please go to kqednews.org.